He pushed my hand away when I reached to pass him the salt. "Don't embarrass me, Dad," he muttered, without looking at me. His wife chuckled, just enough for me to hear. The table went silent. My fingers froze mid-air, the dish rattling gently in my grip. I looked at my son, my boy, and he wouldn't even meet my eyes. I built this home. I raised him in it. And here I was, shrinking into my chair like an unwanted guest. That night, I went to bed without a word. The next morning, I canceled the payment. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. My son, Jeremy, used to hold my hand every time we crossed the street, even when he was too old to need it. "Just in case, Dad," he'd say, his little fingers curling into mine. That's the image that stuck with me most, not the man he is now, but the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest while I read the same bedtime stories over and over. "One more chapter," he'd whisper, pretending he wasn't already dozing off. Marjorie used to stand in the doorway and smile, her arms folded, her eyes soft. I lost her when Jeremy was 9. Breast cancer. It came fast and left a silence in the house that even the clocks refused to tick through. For months, he didn't speak much. He'd just sit on the porch steps with her old scarf in his hands. I'd cook dinner and he wouldn't eat. I'd ask about school and he'd shrug. But I kept going, not because I was strong, but because I had to be. I couldn't afford to break down. Jeremy had already lost one parent. I worked 2 jobs back then. Mornings at the lumber yard, nights at the gas station. My hands were always dry and cracked, my eyes heavy, but every night, I still managed to sit beside his bed and talk to him, even if he didn't say much back. Eventually, he began to open up again. Slowly. He'd leave notes in his lunchbox for me. "Thanks for the sandwich. You're the best, Dad." I kept every single one. Still have them, folded in a shoebox in my closet. When he turned 16, I taught him how to change the oil in my old Ford. He hated it, said it smelled like dead dinosaurs, but he laughed while he said it. Those were good days. On weekends, we'd build things in the garage, birdhouses, stools, a crooked bookshelf we were both too proud of to ever fix. Marjorie had wanted a garden bench, and one spring we made one from the oak boards I'd saved from a torn-down barn. Jeremy carved her initials into the side. He was thoughtful like that, once. After high school, he didn't want to go far. Said he didn't want me to be alone. I told him to live his life, that I'd be fine, but he insisted. He commuted to college, worked part-time, and we kept living together. The house felt alive then, like the echoes of Marjorie's voice still lingered in the corners. On Sunday mornings, we'd cook pancakes together, the two of us bumping into each other in the kitchen like a couple of amateurs. He made the batter, I burned the first 2. It became a tradition. When he met Carla, things changed. Not at first. She was quiet, polite, even a little shy. She'd help clean up after dinners, ask about the bench in the yard. I liked her, or thought I did. She and Jeremy seemed happy. He brought her home often, and I watched as he lit up when she walked through the door. He loved her, I could see it. And I wanted him to be happy. I really did. When he proposed, he asked me to help plan the backyard ceremony. We mowed the lawn together, strung up fairy lights, and painted the old fence. I even let him dig up part of Marjorie's flower bed to make room for tables. It hurt, but I smiled through it. He was building a new life, and it was time to let go of some things. Or so I told myself. He moved Carla in 2 months before the wedding. I gave them the master bedroom, said it was only fair. Took the smaller room at the back, the one that used to be Jeremy's when he was little. It was tight, but I didn't mind. I was just happy to hear laughter in the house again. I didn't realize, then, how quickly laughter can turn into something else. I continued to pay most of the bills. The house was in my name, and I'd always promised Marjorie I'd keep it running no matter what. Jeremy helped when he could, but I never asked. He was starting a new career. Carla was in nursing school. Money was tight for them, and I remembered what it was like to be young and struggling. I wanted to make it easier for them, to give them the stability I never had when I was starting out. But something changed. Slowly. At first, I thought it was just growing pains. I'd come into the kitchen and they'd stop talking. Carla started referring to it as our house when her parents came to visit. Jeremy stopped asking me to join them on walks or movie nights. I chalked it up to newlywed life. I figured they just needed space. But a part of me, that old father's instinct, started whispering that maybe it wasn't just that. Still, I kept loving them. I fixed the gutters, painted the porch, made coffee every morning before they woke up. I left notes for Jeremy like I used to. He rarely replied. But love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just staying, helping, giving, even when no one notices. And even then, even when the silence started to grow between us, I never once imagined that he'd turn cold. That he'd look at me the way strangers do, like I was in the way. Like I was something to manage, not someone to cherish. That night at dinner, the night he swatted my hand away like I was a child embarrassing him, wasn't the start of it. It was just the first time I let myself see what had already begun. It started with little things. Carla began rearranging the house without asking. At first, it was harmless, moving the fruit bowl to a different counter, replacing the curtains Marjorie had sewn with newer, trendier ones. I told myself it was normal. She lived here now, after all. She had a right to make it feel like home. But then she replaced the picture of Marjorie and me on the mantel with a mirror. Said it brightened the space. That one stung. I found the frame tucked in a drawer in the laundry room 2 days later. Jeremy didn't say anything when I mentioned it. Just shrugged and said, "She's trying to make the place nice, Dad. Don't be so sensitive." Sensitive. That word rattled around in my chest for days. Then came the small silences. I'd come into the living room while they were watching TV, and the talking would stop. They'd smile politely, Carla would scoot closer to him, and I'd suddenly feel like I'd walked into someone else's house. I'd pretend to check the thermostat or grab a glass of water and retreat to my room. My own house felt like it had corners I no longer belonged in. The dinners changed too. Used to be, we'd sit together and talk, even if it was just about the weather or Jeremy's work. But Carla started cooking separately. They'd eat late, without inviting me. I'd find dishes in the sink and crumbs on the counter. One night, I asked if they wanted to eat together. Carla smiled and said, "Oh, we already ate. We assumed you had plans." I didn't. There was one morning, I remember it because it was the first time I felt something close to anger, when I overheard Carla on the phone with a friend. "He's still here." "Yeah, he's in the back room." "No, Jeremy doesn't want to push him yet." "But honestly, it's time." "Push me? Push me where?" When I walked into the kitchen, she smiled like nothing had happened. I didn't say a word. Just poured my coffee and sat at the table, her voice still echoing in my head. Jeremy began calling the house ours more often. "We need to fix our gutters," or "we're thinking of repainting our living room." It was a quiet shift in language, but I heard it every time. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. I knew who built those walls. I knew who paid every bill, every repair, every coat of paint. But maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe they wanted me to forget. One Saturday afternoon, Jeremy asked if I could start giving them a bit more space, just on weekends, maybe go see a movie or visit some friends. Friends? Most of my friends were gone, moved away, or buried already. I asked him if I'd done something wrong. He sighed, rubbed the back of his neck, and said, "It's just, you being around all the time kind of changes the energy." The energy. I wanted to ask him what kind of energy I gave off. Was it the kind that raised him? The kind that paid for his braces, sat through his school plays, held him during storms? But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and said, "I'll go for more walks." I started spending hours at the park. Feeding ducks. Reading old magazines at the library. Sometimes I'd sit at the hardware store, pretending to browse. Just to avoid coming home too early. My house. My rules. But suddenly, I was tiptoeing like a guest in it. One day I came back early from the park and found Carla holding a small group in the living room. Some of her friends, women I'd never met. They had wine glasses and were laughing about something. When I walked in, the laughter stopped. Carla stood and said, "Oh, we weren't expecting you back yet, Mr. Hayes." Mr. Hayes. I'd been Dad 4 months after they got married. Now I was back to Mr. Hayes. Like I was the landlord or the upstairs tenant. I left the room without a word and went to lie down. I stared at the ceiling for an hour, wondering when exactly I became invisible. Around that same time, I noticed money going missing from the joint account Jeremy asked me to help him set up years ago. It was meant for emergencies and house repairs, but there were new furniture purchases, a weekend Airbnb in Napa, beauty treatments. Not a single conversation beforehand. I didn't want to believe it at first. I triple-checked the statements. I even called the bank, convinced it was a mistake. But no, every charge was accounted for, every dollar withdrawn intentionally. I confronted Jeremy about it, gently. Asked if maybe we could set clearer boundaries. He rolled his eyes. "Dad, you've always said the house is for us. You told Mom you'd keep it in the family. We're just taking responsibility for it." Taking responsibility. Carla stood behind him, arms crossed. "We just assumed you trusted us," she added, as if I were being unreasonable. Her tone was cool, professional, like I was a client causing a mild inconvenience. I swallowed my pride that night. Told myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was just the way things worked now, the younger generation taking the reins, the older stepping aside. But deep down, I knew. I knew something had shifted. Not just the house or the money. The love, the warmth, the respect, it was all thinning, like the last daylight of a long evening. They saw me as an old man who wouldn't be around forever. And maybe they were right. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was how much I noticed. And how long I'd been watching. The night it happened, I had made a casserole. Beef and potato, just like Marjorie used to. I'd been saving the last of the rosemary from her little garden for something special, and I figured, why not tonight? It had been a long time since the three of us sat down together. So, I cooked. I set the table. I even lit a candle. When Jeremy came home, Carla behind him with shopping bags, I greeted them with a smile. "Dinner's hot," I said. "Thought we could eat together." Carla didn't respond. She dropped her purse on the counter and muttered, "We already ate." Jeremy glanced at the table, then at me. "We weren't sure what your plans were, Dad." Plans? I had been in the kitchen for 2 hours. They knew. Still, I tried to salvage the moment. "Well, it's here if you're hungry." Carla rolled her eyes. "We're trying to cut carbs." That was the end of it. They went upstairs, and I sat alone at the table, chewing slowly, each bite colder than the last. The candle flickered for a while, then gave up. But that wasn't the betrayal. Not yet. That came 3 days later, when Jeremy's childhood friend Luke stopped by. I hadn't seen Luke in years. He was like a second son once, always at our house after school, always full of jokes and questions. "Hey, Mr. Hayes, he said, shifting awkwardly at the door. I was just dropping something off for Jeremy. Didn't know if he was home. We chatted for a few minutes, small talk about the yard, the weather, his parents. Then, before he left, he hesitated. I don't know if I should say anything, he began, eyes darting. But Jeremy mentioned something last weekend. At the bar. I thought maybe you already knew. Knew what? He lowered his voice. That they're planning to move you out. Into a facility. I felt my heart drop, a strange hollowness blooming in my chest. A what? I asked, though I already knew what he meant. An assisted living place. Somewhere nearby, I think. Carla's been pushing for it. Jeremy said they're looking at getting power of attorney or something like that. My vision blurred. I don't remember what I said next, only that Luke looked embarrassed. Sorry. I just thought you'd want to know. After he left, I sat on the porch until the sun went down. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stared at the cracked driveway, the birdbath Marjorie had painted blue, the fence Jeremy and I built the summer he turned 17. I remembered him hammering nails too shallow and laughing when they popped out. I remembered him saying, one day, my kids will play in this yard too. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind flipping back through decades of memories like a photo album soaked in rain, everything blurry, fading. Had it all meant so little to him? Was I really just in the way? The next morning, I opened the closet in the spare room, the one where Carla had stuffed Marjorie's picture, and pulled out the old lockbox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents, the deed to the house, Marjorie's will, Jeremy's birth certificate. I took them out, one by one, and laid them on the bed. Then I opened my nightstand drawer and found the envelope Jeremy had handed me 6 months ago. Just sign this, Dad. It'll help us manage things better, he'd said. Power of attorney. At the time, I hadn't signed. Something about the timing felt off. Now I was thankful for that flicker of instinct. That signature would have handed them everything. I spent the rest of the morning going room to room, seeing the house with new eyes. My recliner had been pushed into the corner of the living room, half blocked by one of Carla's giant houseplants. The guest bathroom now had monogrammed towels that said JNC. My collection of antique radios, carefully dusted, arranged on shelves, had been moved into boxes in the garage. I'd become a footnote in my own home. And then came Sunday dinner. Carla's parents were visiting. I was invited, technically. Jeremy mumbled something about joining us if you want, but it felt more like a courtesy than an actual offer. I sat at the table with them, listening to Carla's father brag about his golf score, her mother complain about traffic. No one asked me a single question. At one point, I offered a story, just a small one, about Jeremy falling in the lake when he was 10, and Carla interrupted before I could finish. Oh, we've heard that one, she said, smiling tightly. Maybe save it for another time. Everyone laughed, even Jeremy. Even Jeremy. I looked at him. He was already sipping his wine, eyes on Carla, smiling at something she whispered in his ear. I felt invisible. No. Not invisible. Erased. When dinner ended, I stood slowly. My knees ached, and I leaned on the table for a second. No one offered to help. I walked out without saying goodnight. In the hallway, I passed the wedding photo they'd framed near the stairs. The one where they stood smiling, arms linked. I had paid for that wedding. Paid for the dress, the catering, even the floral arrangements Carla had insisted were non-negotiable. I'd done it all with a full heart. And now they were negotiating me out of their lives like a piece of outdated furniture. That night, I didn't just feel sad. I felt betrayed. I closed my door. Locked it. And I began writing everything down. Not to vent, not to wallow, but to remember. Every detail. Every slight. Every silence that screamed louder than words. Because I knew now, this wasn't just neglect. This was something else. And they were going to learn that I might be old, but I wasn't stupid. I wasn't snooping. Let's get that straight. I wasn't creeping around corners or eavesdropping for fun. But when your son is planning to ship you off and take your house, you start paying attention, even to whispers behind closed doors. It started with a slip. Carla forgot to log out of her laptop. She had left it on the kitchen counter one morning while she showered. I wasn't looking for anything. I just wanted to check the weather. But when I opened the browser, the first tab caught my eye: best assisted living near me, luxury options for aging parents. Aging parents. Plural. Like I was a demographic, not a man. I clicked out of it, my hands trembling. I should have let it go. Maybe she was researching for a client or someone else in her family. But no. My gut knew better. My gut had been screaming for weeks, and now it had a reason. Later that day, I waited until they left for errands. I went back into the laptop, hesitating only briefly before opening her email. The subject lines were plain. Power of attorney, urgent follow-up. Home transfer deed steps. Monthly rates, Sunset Grove Memory Care Facility. Sunset Grove. Memory care. As if I was slipping. As if I couldn't remember what they were doing right in front of me. One email was from a lawyer, not mine. Apparently, they had already started drafting a transition plan. The goal? To have me moved within 60 to 90 days, depending on my mental and physical responsiveness. That was the phrase they used. Mental responsiveness. I stared at those words for what felt like an hour. My hands were shaking. I closed the laptop and walked outside before I did something I'd regret. The bench in the garden was cold. I sat anyway, rubbing my palms together, trying to calm the fire crawling through my chest. It wasn't just betrayal, it was strategy. They had planned this like a business deal. I was the variable. The obstacle. They'd smiled in my face. Ate the food I cooked. Used the lights I paid for. And they were trying to replace me without ever saying a word. The next morning, I woke up early, before the sun, before the birds even stirred. I pulled the old metal box from under my bed and opened it again. Everything was there: my will, the house deed, Marjorie's letters. I pulled out the envelope Jeremy had once handed me, the one I never signed, and held it up to the light. Power of attorney. If I had signed this, they could have done it already. Transferred the house, emptied the accounts, sent me packing. Without needing my consent. I placed the envelope on the table and stared at it for a long time. Then I opened the drawer, took out my checkbook, and cancelled the automatic monthly payment I'd been sending them. For 6 years I had covered their mortgage, despite owning the house myself. I told myself it was helping them get started. I wanted them to build their lives with less struggle than I had. But it wasn't help anymore. It was fuel. I was paying to be erased. That same day, I made an appointment with Mr. Harold Whitman, the town's oldest attorney, and my longtime friend. He and I had served in the same army unit decades ago. I hadn't seen him in years, but I knew I could trust him. If anyone could help me protect what mattered, it was Harold. He welcomed me into his office like an old brother. "You're not the first parent to sit in that chair," he said as he poured me coffee. "But you might be the only one who still has time to act." I showed him everything. The emails. The unsigned papers. The house deed. My will. He read quietly, his face hardening with each page. "This is bad," he finally muttered. "But you're not out of options." We spent 2 hours drafting a new will, airtight, with no room for manipulation. Jeremy and Carla were removed completely. The house, the savings, the antique radios, the insurance, all of it redirected. If the will was contested, every asset would go straight to a local veterans shelter. I chose it because it's the kind of place Marjorie used to volunteer at. She believed in giving back to those who were forgotten. Now, so did I. Harold added one clause I hadn't thought of: any attempt to gain financial control or exert pressure upon the testator will render the inheritor disqualified. We signed it together. I shook Harold's hand, stronger than I had in years. As I walked home, something strange happened. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel smug. I felt tired. I remembered the way Jeremy used to run down the hall in his pajamas, giggling. I remembered holding him after Marjorie's funeral, his tiny arms wrapped around my neck. I remembered teaching him how to tie his tie before prom. I remembered every moment I had loved him, and it ached. But I also remembered Marjorie's voice in the kitchen. I remembered her laugh. I remembered her eyes narrowing when she was suspicious of someone. People reveal themselves, Gerald, she used to say. All you have to do is listen long enough. I had listened. And now I had acted. That night, I sat in the garden under the stars. I didn't tell them what I'd done. I didn't rage. I didn't accuse. I just watched them from the distance of my porch, sipping wine and scrolling on their phones. Oblivious. Unconcerned. Secure in their scheme. But that security wouldn't last. I had drawn my line. And soon, they would see it. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen while Jeremy was making toast. He didn't look up from his phone. I watched the butter knife tremble slightly in his hand as I stood there longer than usual. We need to talk, I said. He finally glanced up, eyebrows raised like I had interrupted something terribly important. Yeah? What's up? I sat down across from him, folding my hands. I saw the emails. The facility plans. The transfer documents. He froze for a second. Just one heartbeat's worth. Then, like flipping a switch, he smiled, wide, forced. Dad, it's not what you think. I kept my eyes on him. You weren't supposed to see that, he added quickly, then caught himself. I mean, we were going to talk to you. We wanted to find the right time. I said nothing. Jeremy leaned forward, putting on his reasonable voice, the one he used when he was trying to pitch me on something. Look, Carla and we've just been thinking about your future. You're not getting any younger, Anne. Don't, I said softly. He blinked. Don't what? Don't pretend this is about my well-being. He stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back. Well, I'm sorry you feel that way. But maybe if you didn't shut yourself in your room all the time, we'd all feel more like a family. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the first time I'd seen the cracks in his composure. The mask was slipping. I stood too. A family doesn't make plans to remove someone from their home behind their back. Jeremy rolled his eyes and turned away. It's not your house, Dad. Not anymore. We live here. We've made it ours. And there it was. Not yours anymore. I left the kitchen without another word. My heart was pounding, but not from anger. From clarity. From the final weight of truth settling in. He believed it, that I no longer belonged here. That he and Carla had taken over. That afternoon, I walked into town. I stopped at the bakery for a coffee, even though I wasn't thirsty. I just needed to see faces. Real people. The woman at the counter, Angie, had known Marjorie and me for decades. She poured the coffee and said, "You look tired today, Mr. Hayes." I nodded, managing a small smile. As I stirred the cream in, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Mark, my old neighbor from 2 blocks over. You all right? He asked. I hesitated. I think I'm just getting old. He sat down without asking, placed his cane beside the chair. Getting old doesn't mean you should be treated like a ghost. I've seen your boy. He used to look at you like you hung the stars. Now he walks past you like you're a wall. I didn't respond right away. Mark leaned in. I've seen this happen before. Kids forget who built the floor they stand on. But that don't mean you let them walk over you. I nodded slowly. You thinking of leaving? He asked. No, I said. I'm thinking of reminding them whose name is on the door. When I got home, Carla was in the backyard taking selfies near the garden Marjorie planted. I watched her through the window. She adjusted the flowers just right, tilting her head, angling the phone, smiling wide. It was the same expression she used when her parents came to visit, when she paraded the house like a prize they'd won. I stepped outside, slowly, not saying anything. She turned, startled. Oh, you scared me, she said, voice high and sugar-sweet. Just needed some air. She nodded. Jeremy said you were upset. I'm not upset. She blinked. Really? No. I'm disappointed. But that's different. She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Well, I hope we can all talk like adults soon. It's really important to Jeremy that you feel included. Included. The word spun in my head like a loose wheel. I've made some adjustments, I said flatly. To my finances. And the will. Her face shifted, a flicker of panic before the mask slid back on. Oh. I nodded. Nothing you need to worry about. Just making sure things are clear, for everyone. She opened her mouth, probably to pry, but I walked back inside before she could. That night, I found the scrapbook Marjorie had made during our first year in the house. Photos of Jeremy in the yard, of her in the kitchen wearing that silly apron with a chicken on it, of me holding them both, younger, stronger, unaware of what the future held. I flipped through it until I reached the note she'd written on the inside cover. This house is made of more than walls. It's made of love, sacrifice, and the moments we never photograph. Keep it safe, Jerry. Keep it honest. I read that line again. And again. The next morning, I printed copies of my updated will. One went into the safe. One into the lockbox. One into an envelope I labeled, for Jeremy, only when he's ready. I wasn't sure when that would be. Or if. But I knew this, I had found my spine again. I wasn't going to be bullied out of my own life. And I wasn't done yet. Harold's office smelled the same as it always had, old wood, older books, and that faint trace of pipe tobacco even though he hadn't smoked in 20 years. The room was still lined with those massive shelves full of law books, and his desk, worn smooth by time, sat like an altar to quiet wisdom. I'd sat across from him once before, after Marjorie passed, to update her name off the deed. I remember how hard that was. But this? This was harder in a different way. Are you absolutely sure, Jerry? He asked, his reading glasses low on his nose. I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He exhaled slowly, flipping through the documents we'd started the week before. You know, I've seen some nasty inheritance battles. But this is a slow, quiet kind of cruelty. The kind that cuts without a sound. I didn't say anything. Just watched the pen roll across the table and come to a stop. We sat in silence for a moment before he continued. We'll remove Jeremy and Carla entirely. All assets, house, savings, pension, insurance, to go into the Marjorie Hayes Foundation upon your death. That's right. And the clause about contesting the will? Keep it in. If they fight it, they get nothing. Everything goes to the veterans' shelter. Harold nodded grimly. You want to leave anything for your granddaughter? I paused. I don't know yet, I admitted. She's still young. And she hasn't done anything wrong. But she also hasn't spoken to me in months. I want to believe she's just caught in the middle. I'll put a conditional clause, he said, already scribbling in the margins. If she reaches out on her own, without prompting, she inherits a share. If not, it stays with the shelter. That sat right with me. Fair. Honest. The way Marjorie would have wanted. When all was written, typed, notarized, and signed, Harold closed the folder and placed his hand on top of it. You know, he said, voice softening, this isn't just paperwork. This is you taking back your story. I nodded. Feels strange. Like I should be grieving. You are. Just not in the way people think. I stood to leave, and he followed me to the door. Jerry, he said, before I stepped outside. You're not alone in this. Call me if anything changes. And if they try anything before you're gone, we'll be ready. I walked back home with the will tucked safely in my coat pocket. The streets felt different. Not lighter, exactly. But firmer beneath my feet. Like I was walking with weight again, but this time, it was the kind of weight I chose to carry. When I got back to the house, Carla was in the living room, folding laundry. She barely looked up when I walked in. Out for a walk, she asked, casually. Something like that. She smiled without warmth. Jeremy's at work late. You need anything? No, I said, and started for the stairs. Then I paused. Actually, yes. She looked at me, eyebrows raised. I'd like you to stop moving things in the house without asking. Especially family photos. Her smile faded just enough to see the irritation underneath. I was just trying to update the look a little. It's not personal. It is, I said. It always is. She didn't reply, and I didn't wait. I went to my room and locked the door. That night, I sat in Marjorie's old chair and read her letters again, the ones she left for me when she knew she was dying. She'd written 5 of them. One for each of her final days. I had read them before, years ago, but this time, I read them with different eyes. One line jumped out at me. If Jeremy ever forgets where he came from, remind him, gently, but firmly. And if he refuses to remember, let the house speak for itself. I stared at that sentence until the ink blurred. Let the house speak for itself. It wasn't just a home. It was a record. Of love. Of loss. Of sacrifice. If Jeremy didn't want to hear me, maybe he'd hear what this place had to say when I was gone. The next morning, I put the finalized will in the lockbox beneath my bed. I made 2 copies. One went to Harold. The other, I sealed in an envelope labeled, to be opened only if they ask why. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I stopped making coffee for them. For years, even when they ignored me, I'd start the day by brewing a full pot. Leave 2 mugs beside the machine. A silent ritual of peace. But that morning, I made a single cup. For myself. And I took it to the porch, where I sat and watched the sun rise without speaking to anyone. Jeremy walked past the window a few minutes later. He noticed the empty counter. The missing second mug. I saw him pause, then continue walking. Something small. But necessary. The withdrawal had begun. Not out of spite. Not out of bitterness. Out of survival. They had built their lives assuming I'd always play along, that my silence was permission. But now, I had rewritten the rules. This wasn't revenge. It was protection. This wasn't about punishment. It was about peace. My peace. And I wasn't going to lose it again. It was a Tuesday when I saw the real plan, not the whispers, not the polite lies, but the future they were drawing up without me. Carla left a folder on the kitchen counter, one of those glossy ones from a real estate office. She'd probably meant to hide it before I came down for breakfast, but there it was, bold, glossy, shameless. A fresh vision for the Hayes property was printed across the top. I stood there, unmoving, just staring at the photos inside. Renderings of the house, my house, gutted, remodeled, modernized. The porch replaced with steel railings. The garden turned into a paved patio with space for a fire pit. Marjorie's flower beds gone, replaced by something labeled low-maintenance aesthetic. I flipped the page and saw bullet points. Master Suite Edition, pending permit. Potential rental income from converted lower unit. Projected value increase post-renovation, $165,000 plus. At the bottom, in fine print, it read, ownership status, pending transfer. They weren't just planning to move me out. They were planning to erase me completely. I took the folder and walked straight to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't feel sad. Not at first. Just cold. Mechanical. I spread the pages out on the bedspread, staring at them one by one. Renderings of a future I was never meant to be part of. They'd already made decisions. Called contractors. Scheduled meetings. And they hadn't told me a damn word. The last straw wasn't loud. It wasn't a fight or a scream. It was that folder, that casual, confident assumption that I wouldn't matter soon enough. I opened my drawer and pulled out the binder with all my documents. I checked that the new will was still there. I checked the notarized letters, the legal protections Harold had helped me write. I added the real estate folder to it, just in case I needed to show someone exactly how far they'd gone. Then I began packing. Not to leave, not yet, but to prepare. I gathered everything that mattered. Marjorie's letters. The old photographs. My father's pocket watch. The original deed to the house, still in my name, notarized and stamped from 1973. I placed them all in a small fireproof case and stored it under the bed. I pulled out a canvas duffel bag, one I hadn't used since the fishing trip Jeremy and I took 15 years ago, and quietly packed 2 sets of clothes, my medication, a flashlight, and a small radio. Not because I planned to run. Because I wanted to be ready for anything. That night, Jeremy came home late, smelling of cologne and expensive whiskey. He stood in the doorway of my room, leaning against the frame like nothing had happened. "You've been quiet," he said, voice too casual. I didn't look up. "Lots on my mind." He hesitated, then added, "Carla's been stressed. She thinks you're mad at her." I finally looked at him. "She left the renovation plans on the counter." He stiffened. Okay, that was premature. We were just exploring ideas. "Ownership status, pending transfer," I quoted, flatly. He waved a hand. "Look, we didn't mean for you to see that yet. It's just, we're trying to think about the future, Dad. Long-term planning. You're not going to be here forever, Anne." "No," I interrupted, standing now. "But I'm still here now. And this is my house. Not a project. Not a windfall. Not a second chance at a better kitchen." Jeremy's expression hardened. "You always do this. You make everything about control. We're trying to build something here. At the cost of what?" I snapped. "Everything I built? Everything your mother and I worked for?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. I walked past him and into the hallway. My voice was low, steady. "I'm not just stepping aside so you can bulldoze my life. You want to build something? Start with your own foundation." He didn't follow me. Not that night. I slept lightly, half-dressed, one eye on the packed bag. Not from fear, from readiness. I knew the time was near. There was a family party that weekend, Carla's birthday, being held at a fancy little event space downtown. I wasn't invited officially, but I knew it was open. I heard them talking about it over dinner one night, laughing about themes and decorations, pretending like I wasn't sitting 10 feet away. That would be the moment. I could feel it in my bones. They thought I was too quiet to act. Too old to matter. But they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Because if they wanted to turn my home into a blueprint, then I was going to turn their plan into a cautionary tale. I showed up wearing my old suit, the gray one Marjorie used to say made me look like a senator, even though the collar was fraying and the buttons didn't match anymore. I hadn't worn it in years. Not since Jeremy's wedding. The event hall was buzzing when I arrived. Music, chatter, clinking glasses. Balloons and gold and ivory were tied to every chair. A photo booth near the back had pictures of Carla and Jeremy taped to a board that read, "Celebrating our future." Fitting, I thought. They sure loved talking about the future. I wasn't invited, but no one stopped me. Some of Carla's friends glanced at me, confused, but kept sipping their drinks. I walked through the crowd, past the buffet table, past the decorations, until I reached the center of the room where Jeremy and Carla were surrounded by a ring of guests. When Carla saw me, her smile froze. It didn't fade, not yet, but it stopped growing. Jeremy turned, wine glass in hand. "Dad?" I nodded. "Evening, son." A few people turned toward us, sensing the tension immediately. The music thumped on in the background, but softer now. "I didn't know you were coming," Jeremy said, voice clipped. "I know," I replied. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope, the one labeled, "To be opened only if they ask why." But I didn't hand it to him. Not yet. I looked around the room. Familiar faces. Old neighbors. Even Harold was in the corner, sipping quietly from a glass of soda, his eyes already locked on mine. "I won't take up much of your time," I said, raising my voice just enough to carry. "I just wanted to offer Carla my congratulations." She tilted her head, wary. "Thank you." And, I continued, "I figured it's only right to say a few words about the house." A hush fell. The music kept playing, but it felt distant, like it belonged to another place entirely. Jeremy stepped forward. "Dad, maybe this isn't." "I won't be long," I said firmly. I pulled a small stack of papers from the same pocket and held them up. "I've recently updated my will. Removed some names. Added a few new ones. I also included something called a no contest clause. For those unfamiliar, it means if someone tries to dispute the will, everything goes to charity." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jeremy's face went red. "What are you doing?" "I'm making sure there's no confusion," I said. "About who owns the house. And what will happen to it when I'm gone." Carla's jaw clenched. "You're making a scene." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm drawing a line." I held up the real estate brochure they had left on the counter, the one with the renovation plans. "For anyone who's interested, this is what they were planning. A complete remodel. Rental units. Garden destroyed. Everything my wife built, gone." Jeremy stepped toward me. "You're twisting this." "No, Jeremy. I'm revealing it." I turned to the crowd now, my voice steady but raw. "This house isn't just where I live. It's my life. My history. It's where Marjorie died. Where Jeremy was born. Where we built everything, one nail and one prayer at a time." I paused. Took a breath. And they tried to take it while I was still breathing. Gasps now. Someone dropped a fork. Others looked away. A woman near the front whispered, "He's serious." Jeremy looked like he was about to explode. "Why are you doing this in front of everyone?" "Because you did it behind closed doors," I said, voice cracking for the first time. "You thought I was too old, too soft, too quiet. But I remember everything. Every corner of that house. Every sacrifice. Every story you now call clutter." Carla finally spoke. "You're ruining everything." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see her as an intruder. I saw her as a mirror of everything Jeremy had become. "No," I said. "I'm saving what's left." I handed the envelope to Jeremy at last. "When you're ready to know why, really know, open this. But until then, we have nothing left to say." I turned then, not waiting for applause, not expecting forgiveness. Just silence. And I got it. As I walked out, the music had stopped completely. The air was thick with discomfort. Harold gave me the slightest nod as I passed, and I returned it. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. I stood beneath the stars for a moment, breathing it all in. I had said what needed to be said. And I had finally been heard. Brain, do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The silence afterward wasn't just quiet, it was a silence that settled into the bones of the house itself. You could feel it in the walls, in the way the floorboards didn't creak as much, in the way even the wind outside seemed hesitant to rattle the windows. Jeremy and Carla didn't come home that night. The next morning, I sat alone at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee the way I always had. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the counter. Everything was in its place, but nothing felt the same. I had delivered my truth in front of everyone. My heart was still pounding from it, even 24 hours later. It hadn't been loud or violent, but it had been final. By noon, word had spread across the neighborhood. My phone buzzed with messages I didn't answer. A few neighbors came by, just to check in, but I could see in their eyes that they'd heard. Some looked at me with sympathy. Others, curiosity. A few, the older ones who still remembered Marjorie, patted my shoulder and said, "It's about time." Jeremy didn't call. Carla didn't text. But the quiet? That was its own kind of message. And it was a relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe inside my own home. The TV stayed off. The fridge didn't have new fingerprints on the door. The floors stayed clean. I moved through the room slowly, touching the furniture they used to scoff at, tracing my fingers along the photo frames that had been boxed away and now proudly stood again on the mantel. I walked into the garden, Marjorie's garden, and sat on the bench we'd built together. Some of the rosemary had withered, but the lavender was hanging on. I picked a sprig and held it to my nose. Her scent. Her memory. Still here. I whispered into the breeze, "I did it, Marjorie. I didn't let them take it." Later that evening, someone knocked at the door. It was Angie from the bakery. She held a small tin of cookies and gave me an awkward, sweet smile. "I just thought you could use a little sweetness." I invited her in, and we sat for a while. Nothing romantic, just two old souls sipping tea and talking about the past. She told me about her father's final years, how her brother had tried something similar with their family farm. How they'd nearly lost everything to entitlement and paperwork. "It's always the ones you love the most," she said. "They think they've got a right to everything you've earned." I nodded. "He used to sleep on my chest," I whispered. "Now he can't look me in the eye." She placed her hand over mine, gentle but firm. "He will. One day. Maybe not to apologize. But he'll remember." We sat like that for a long time. The next morning, I took a walk through the park, nodding at old couples and waving at toddlers. A man at the veterans bench recognized me and said, "Saw you stand up to your boy." Took guts. I smiled. Took time. Wish I'd had your nerve when mine tried it, he said. I just gave up and moved out. Still regret it. We talked for an hour. 2, maybe. And when I got home, there was a small envelope stuck in the front door. No return address. Inside was a short note, written in my granddaughter's handwriting. I heard what happened. I don't know what to say. But I'm thinking of you. L. No apology. No promises. Just a seed. And for now, that was enough. That night, I sat on the porch, Marjorie's blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the stars blink one by one. The house was quiet, no footsteps upstairs, no blender screaming from the kitchen, no passive-aggressive sighs from Carla when I left my book on the table. Just silence. And peace. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something new. I was alone. But not abandoned. I was healing. And I was just getting started. It started with a newspaper clipping. An article left on the bench outside the bakery. Angie said someone must have dropped it, but something about her voice made me think she'd left it there on purpose. The headline read, "Local shelter overwhelmed by veteran housing needs." I took it home, sat in my usual chair, and read every word. The shelter was 5 miles away, underfunded, understaffed, barely keeping the roof over its residents. Veterans sleeping in cots, some in their cars. It hit me hard. Maybe because I saw my own face in those men. Maybe because I knew what it meant to be forgotten. That night, I didn't sleep much. I just kept thinking about how quiet this house had become. How empty. Too many rooms, too many beds. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if this house could mean something again? The next morning, I called Harold. "You've got some energy in your voice today," he said, amused. "I have an idea. And I want your help making it real." Over coffee, I laid it all out. I wanted to turn my home into a small retreat, a transitional space for veterans who needed time to get back on their feet. Not a shelter exactly, but a place with dignity. A safe stop between hardship and healing. Harold listened carefully, then leaned back in his chair. "It's bold," he said. "You'd need permits. Insurance. Modifications to the house." "I've got time," I said. "And I've got the house. Do you have the help?" That gave me pause. But only for a moment. "I'll find it." And I did. Angie introduced me to Ruth, a retired nurse who had volunteered at the shelter. Ruth brought me to Daniel, a carpenter with one leg and a sharp tongue who offered to help with ramps and repairs, if I covered coffee and donuts. I opened the house slowly, one room at a time. We started with the guest room Jeremy and Carla never let anyone use. I cleaned it top to bottom, moved in a twin bed from storage, patched the wall where the plaster had cracked. Ruth brought fresh linens. Daniel replaced the squeaky hinges. The first guest arrived in October. His name was Curtis. 61, soft-spoken, worn down to the bone. He carried everything he owned in a military duffel and had nowhere else to go after his brother kicked him out. "This is just for a few nights," I said when I let him in. But inside, I was already hoping he'd stay longer. Curtis helped in the yard. Trimmed Marjorie's roses. Repaired the back fence. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his voice was steady. One night over dinner, he told me, "Feels like home here. Haven't said that in a while." And just like that, the house didn't feel empty anymore. Word spread. Slowly, quietly. I didn't make any announcements. But somehow, those who needed it found their way. A man named Leo arrived next, fresh out of rehab. Then Dennis, who'd been sleeping in his truck since spring. I limited it to 2 at a time. The house wasn't big enough for more, but with each one who came, the silence lifted. We ate dinners at the same table. Jeremy once told me I changed the energy of. Now it was filled with conversation. Laughter. Stories. Real stories. I set up a corkboard in the hallway and pinned photos: Curtis in the garden, Leo fixing the porch swing, Dennis holding Marjorie's old cat who had taken a liking to him. The hallway came alive again. One morning, I found a note on the fridge. "Thank you for letting me feel like a person again." I didn't know who wrote it. I didn't need to. Everything was falling into place. I filed the paperwork with Harold to form the Marjorie Hayes Transitional Home. He handled the legal side while I handled the people. Angie stopped by weekly with muffins and local gossip. Ruth helped me sort medications and check blood pressure. Daniel became our unofficial handyman. And the house? The house felt like her again. Not Carla's dream remodel. Not Jeremy's financial asset. But Marjorie's house. Warm. Lived in. Honest. One evening, I stood at the edge of the garden, watching Curtis water the lavender. The air smelled like earth and rain. I closed my eyes and could almost hear Marjorie humming, the same soft tune she used to sing when she thought no one was listening. I whispered, "It's alive again, love." Inside, the men were watching a baseball game, arguing gently about stats like brothers. The same floor they once walked over like it didn't matter was now being swept, repaired, respected. And the best part? None of it came from blood. It came from kindness. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe the funding would run out. Maybe the permits would get delayed. Maybe winter would be hard. But I knew this: I wasn't alone anymore. I had built something real. Not with inheritance. With intention. The first time Leo called me Pops, I laughed so hard I spilled coffee on my shirt. "Sorry," he said, grinning sheepishly. "Just slipped out." I waved it off. Haven't been called that in years. From then on, it stuck. "Hey, Pops, we're low on toilet paper." "Pops, the cat threw up in your slippers again." "Pops, you want eggs or pancakes this morning?" It was strange, at first, being seen that way by people who weren't blood. But over time, it stopped feeling strange and started feeling right. The house was full most days now. Curtis was still with me, helping around the yard and doing crossword puzzles like it was his second religion. Leo had found part-time work at the hardware store. Dennis left last month after getting a job in a tiny apartment across town, but not before hugging me at the front door and saying, "You changed my life, sir." I told him he changed his own. I just opened the door. Ruth dropped by every Thursday to do check-ins, but she stayed longer each time. Sometimes I'd catch her sitting with Curtis on the porch, talking about music and trading war stories. Daniel, despite being as gruff as ever, brought over new tools and even fixed the back screen door without charging me a dime. They weren't family by blood. But they showed up. They worked. They respected the house. And they respected me. That's more than I can say for Jeremy. Not a call. Not a visit. Not even a knock on the door. Carla had apparently moved back in with her parents, or so Angie heard through the grapevine. As for Jeremy? No one seemed to know where he was. Or maybe they did and just didn't want to say. It didn't matter anymore. Because the people who mattered were already here. I started calling it the House of Second Chances. Not officially, the paperwork still read Marjorie Hayes Transitional Home, but among us, that's what it became. It wasn't just a house. It was a place where men came to remember who they were before the world beat them down. And where I remembered who I was before betrayal made me small. One chilly afternoon, I was trimming the rosebush when I heard someone clear their throat behind me. I turned. It was Lily, my granddaughter. She looked older than I remembered, but maybe that's just what guilt does to a person. She held a small paper bag in her hands, like she wasn't sure whether to give it or run away with it. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly. My breath caught. Not because I was angry. But because I wasn't. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," she added quickly. "But I heard what you're doing. The shelter stuff. And I brought cookies." I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded toward the porch. "Come sit." We sat quietly for a few minutes. She handed me the bag. "Peanut butter, my favorite." She remembered. "Dad's been a mess," she said after a while. "He doesn't say it out loud, but he knows he crossed a line." I didn't answer. Just sipped my coffee and waited. "I used to think you were just old-fashioned," she said. "Stuck in your ways. But after everything, I think you were just steady. Like Grandma." Now that made my eyes sting. "I'm sorry I didn't visit sooner," she whispered. I placed my hand gently over hers. "You came. That's what matters." She looked around the porch, the men inside watching TV, the laughter drifting through the open windows. "This feels more like family than anything we've had in years," she said. She wasn't wrong. Later, Curtis brought her a cup of tea. Leo showed her the wall of photos in the hallway. Ruth hugged her like she'd known her forever. And for the first time in a long time, I saw Lily smile, really smile. Not the polite one. Not the "I'm just being nice" one. But the kind that meant she felt safe. She stayed through dinner. Helped wash dishes. Even laughed when the cat jumped on the counter and knocked over the salt. Before she left, she hugged me tightly. "I'd like to come back," she said. "You're always welcome," I replied. "As long as it's you coming, not for anyone else." She nodded. "Just me." That night, I stood at the kitchen sink, drying the last plate, and looked out the window at the stars. I thought of Jeremy, wherever he was. I didn't feel anger anymore. Just distance. The kind that grows when someone forgets who you are, and who you were to them. But then I thought of Curtis. Of Leo. Of Lily. Of laughter in the halls again. Of warm meals and shared stories. And I realized something I hadn't quite understood until that moment. Blood doesn't make you family. Effort does. And in this house, I was surrounded by people who showed up, day after day, with respect in their eyes and kindness in their hands. Real family. The kind Marjorie always hoped would gather here, even if she never lived to see it. And maybe, just maybe, she saw it now. It was raining the day Jeremy came back. Not a dramatic thunderstorm, just a steady, gray drizzle that soaked the porch and left trails on the window panes. I was in the kitchen folding napkins. We had a community dinner planned that night, and Curtis had insisted on using the good ones, even though they were just cloth squares from the dollar store. I heard the knock just after noon. 3 soft taps. I dried my hands and opened the door. He stood there, drenched. No umbrella. No coat. Just his blazer, clinging to him like it didn't belong anymore. His eyes were red, but not fresh from crying. The kind of red that comes after days of exhaustion. "Hi, Dad," he said. For a moment, I didn't answer. He looked thinner. Older. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. He walked in slowly, glancing around like a man stepping into a museum of his own childhood. He noticed the photo wall first, the one with all the men who had stayed here over the last few months. "You've really done something," he muttered. "I've tried," I said simply. I led him to the kitchen. Offered him coffee. He accepted with a quiet "thank you" that felt stiff in his throat. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The rain tapped the windows like it was listening in. "I got your letter," he finally said, pulling the wrinkled envelope from his pocket, the one I'd handed him at Carla's birthday party. "Did you read it?" "Twice." I nodded. Waited. "You said in there, that I stopped seeing you as a father. That I treated you like an obstacle." He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the table. "You were right." He didn't say it like a grand confession. No drama. No tears. Just the truth, laid bare between us. "I let Carla talk me into a lot of things," he continued. "But I didn't fight back. I didn't stand up for you. I told myself it was for the future. For our family. But I was just selfish. Greedy." I looked at him now. Really looked. Not as a son. Not as the boy who used to hug my leg at the grocery store. But as a man. Flawed. Fragile. Human. He went on. "I thought if I got the house, if I had something to show for it all, maybe I wouldn't feel so small. So unaccomplished. But when you stood up that night, when you looked me in the eye in front of everyone, I saw myself clearly for the first time in years. And I didn't like who I'd become." I stayed silent. I could feel his guilt, heavy in the room, but I wasn't going to rush to ease it. Some truths have to sit for a while. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he added quickly. "I'm not here to beg or argue. I needed to say I'm sorry. Not for the will. Not for the money. For forgetting who you are. For treating you like an obligation instead of the man who raised me." The silence after that was deep. Finally, I nodded. "Thank you." He looked up. "That's it? What do you want me to say, Jeremy? That everything's fine? That we go back to the way things were?" He shook his head. "No. I don't deserve that." "No," I agreed, "you don't. But you do deserve the chance to be better." He exhaled sharply, a mix of relief and pain. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, standing to pour another cup of coffee. "But I'm not the same man you walked over, either. And this house, this life, it's not yours to shape anymore." "I know," he whispered. I handed him the coffee. "So, what now?" "I don't know," he said. "Carla and we're done. She moved out. Took what she could. She said she didn't sign up for moral crusades." That made me chuckle. Sounds about right. Jeremy managed a weak smile. "I've been staying with a friend. Looking for work. I've had a lot of time to think. And I want to rebuild. But I don't expect it to happen here." He stood then, cradling the coffee cup like a fragile thing. "I just wanted to look you in the eye and say the words. Because I wasn't man enough to do it when it counted." He walked to the door, then paused. "Do you think, someday, you and I might have dinner again?" I didn't answer right away. I thought of the countless meals we'd once shared. The ones he'd later ignored. The casserole that went cold on the table. The silence he'd filled with excuses and entitlement. "Maybe," I said finally. "If it's just you." He nodded slowly. "Just me." And then he left. No hug. No long goodbye. Just the sound of the door closing gently behind him. Later that night, Curtis asked who the visitor was. "My son," I said. "Everything okay?" he asked. "No," I said, setting down my fork. "But everything's honest." "That's a good start." He nodded, and we went back to dinner, surrounded by laughter, warmth, and something that felt a whole lot like forgiveness. But not forgetfulness. Because I would never forget. But I could begin to heal. Speech balloon: would you forgive your child after a betrayal like this? Let us know in the comments. The plaque went up on a Thursday. Daniel installed it just outside the front door, above the porch steps Jeremy once ran down in cowboy boots when he was 6. It was a simple brass plate, nothing flashy. Ruth helped me write the words, and Angie paid for the engraving without telling me until the box showed up. Marjorie's house, where second chances begin. I stood back and stared at it, hands on my hips, heart thudding like a drum in my chest. She would have liked that, Curtis said, resting his cane on the porch railing. No, I replied, a soft smile creeping up. She would have said, it's crooked, then fixed it herself. We both laughed. But the plaque, crooked or not, meant something. It meant the house had found its voice again. And the day it went up, people came. Neighbors brought folding chairs and baked goods. A few men from the shelter showed up in pressed shirts, standing straighter than I'd ever seen them. Lily arrived with a basket of flowers she arranged herself, lavender and rosemary, just like her grandmother grew. I wore my best shirt and passed out paper cups of sweet tea on the porch while Ruth gave a little speech about the mission. She told the crowd what we'd done here, housed 12 men so far, helped 5 find steady work, and kept every single one of them off the streets for more than 3 months. That was something. Angie read a poem. Daniel refused to speak but stood beside the plaque the whole time like a quiet sentinel. Leo, who had come back just for the event, told the crowd, I didn't know people still cared like this. But this house, it taught me they do. The ribbon was nothing fancy. Just a strip of red cloth Marjorie once used to tie tomato plants to their stakes. I held the scissors in my hand, paused for a breath, then cut it in one clean motion. And just like that, it was official. Marjorie's house had come alive. After the crowd thinned, I walked room to room, as I often did, but this time it felt different. There were hand-painted signs in the hall now, respect lives here, quiet time after 10, coffees for everyone. Leo made them before he left, said every house needed rules and charm. The living room smelled like apple cobbler. The kitchen was still buzzing with dishes and laughter. Someone had brought a guitar. Music drifted out onto the porch, into the garden, and up through the open windows like sunlight. I walked into the back room, the smallest one, the one Jeremy used to call the hideout when he was little. It was now a reading nook. Ruth had helped set up a shelf of donated books. I sat there for a while, looking out the window toward the yard. The lavender had bloomed again. Marjorie's garden, stubborn and graceful, just like her. I closed my eyes and spoke out loud. You'd be proud of this place, love. I imagined her sitting across from me, hands folded in her lap, that soft tilt of her head when she listened. Maybe she'd tease me for taking so long to get here. Maybe she'd cry. Maybe she'd just hold my hand and say, you did right. I'd spent too many years thinking legacy meant passing down a house, a check, a name. But I'd learned the truth the hard way, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build while you're still here. And this house, this community, this second chance, was what I had built. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. Just before sunset, Lily found me on the porch, 2 cups of tea in her hands. They're still cleaning up inside, she said, sitting beside me. I nodded. They'll learn soon enough that dishes never end. She laughed. You know. I think I finally get why Grandma always called this her favorite place on earth. It wasn't the bricks, I said. It was the people who filled it. She sipped her tea thoughtfully, then asked, do you think Dad will come around again? I thought about that for a long moment. About the boy he was, the man he became, and the stranger he had to face when I looked him in the eye that day. Maybe, I said. But if he does, it'll be on different terms. This place isn't for entitlement anymore. It's for healing, she finished. We sat in silence for a while. And then, just as the sky turned orange and gold, Curtis stepped outside with his old camera. Hey, Pops, he called. Let's get a photo, you, Lily, and the porch. I stood slowly, adjusted my collar, and took my place between them. The camera clicked. And in that moment, in the warmth of the setting sun, with laughter in the background and lavender in the air, I felt it. Peace. Not the kind you wait for at the end of life. The kind you earn by standing up when it matters. By choosing honesty over comfort. By remembering that family isn't always blood, it's love, respect, and showing up when it counts. Marjorie's house lived again. And this time, it was full of people who truly understood what home means.